You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and just a couple things before I get going. The first one is that you may notice that I'm going to start titling episodes with something called the trifecta. That is going to be my NFL Draft Big Board that I'm going to do in groups of 4. This Day in Sports History and a Mount Rushmore. So, instead of typing that out every single time, I'm just going to put the trifecta. It'll make life a little easier. I just wanted to clear that up in case you get a little confused seeing it. Although you're not going to see it today because there's a lot of NFL news to get to and the Paul Logothetis interview. Speaking of the NFL, when I was doing the free agency breakdown on Friday, I completely forgot to talk about Robert Quinn. Like, I just missed it. There's no excuse for it. I'm going to talk about it now really, really briefly so I can sleep tonight. It's a good move to bring Quinn in. He had a really good year last year. Pairing him with Khalil Mack is going to make that defense scary. I really like what the Bears did this offseason. There's no excuse for them to not make the playoffs. Make no mistake about it, Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy are both on the hot seat. They have to make the playoffs or they're both going to be out of a job. It's just that simple. The one thing that I don't like about it is he's 30 years old. And you signed him for 5 years at $14 million a year. That's a lot. I'd have liked that contract to have been cheaper. He's getting $30 million guaranteed. I'd have liked the Bears to have signed him to a cheaper contract, one for less years, but I understand why they did it. Like I said, Pace and Nagy are on the hot seat, so pull out all the stops to try to make a playoff run. I don't hate the deal by any stretch. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give it an 8. Okay. On to the Jets signing Greg Van Roten and Pierre Desir. Firstly, let me just say that we don't know the amount of money that they're getting. We know that Van Roten has been signed for 3 years and Desir 1 year. So, I wouldn't be talking about him if they weren't Jets, but I really want to go more in depth on the Jets. I've been waiting to do this for a long time, so please indulge me. I like Van Roten. Van Roten made a ton of sense for the Jets even before free agency. And the fact that the Jets were able to get him this late, I think it's a great move. I have no complaints with the Jets bringing in Greg Van Roten. And Pierre Desir has been a streaky player throughout his career. 1 year he looks really good, the next year he looks really bad. Last year he didn't look terrible, but he didn't exactly look great. Hopefully this 1 year deal gives him incentive to play really well, and the Jets can focus on adding just one more corner as opposed to 2. Here's my thing with these two moves. They still have other holes. You know, this doesn't help them when it comes to edge rusher. Desir is not a world beater. No one's going to mistake him for Darrelle Revis. If you wanted to tell me they still need an outside corner, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you. You know, as it stands right now, they need 2 edge rushers, 1 or 2 corners. Let's say 1, just for argument's sake. You gotta add another wide receiver, whether it's bringing Robbie Anderson back or adding one in the draft. I hope they bring Robbie Anderson back. No excuse for them not to. You gotta add a backup running back to Le'Veon Bell, but that's going to be done in the draft. So, I'm not going to beat hell about that. And I need to find a kicker and a punter. You want to tell me that Brett Maher is the answer? Alright. I don't hate Brett Maher, but I still like the Jets to draft a kicker. What I don't like about what the Jets have done this free agency is they have not been aggressive at all. They missed on a bunch of their big targets. Byron Jones they missed on. Kyle Van Noy they missed on. Chris Harris they missed on. Graham Glasgow they missed on. Missed on a bunch of guys. Now, I know that Joe Douglas has been preaching patience in free agency, and it's kind of nice to see that he's sticking to his plan. He's not going to overpay for a marginal player, which is what teams usually do in free agency. You want to tell me he overpaid for Alex Lewis? You certainly can. Douglas doesn't think he did. Douglas likes Alex Lewis a lot. He has a draft pick invested in him. So he's going to give him more than 1 year to prove that he can be a good player in this league. But as it stands right now, the Jets have the second most cap space in the league, with over $42 million. Only the Browns have more, with $48.5 million, and they were extremely aggressive in free agency. What are the Jets' big moves? Connor McGovern and George Fant? I like McGovern. No complaints there. Fant is really athletic. He's not a bad player by any stretch. It's a gamble to sign him to a big contract, but I don't hate it. I really, really don't. But that can't be the cream of the crop. When you entered the offseason with something like $60 million in cap space, you've got to do better than that. Go out and sign Jadeveon Clowney. How is he still out there? Lock up Robbie Anderson long term. Bring back Jordan Jenkins. I don't care. Spend the money. I'm not asking you to overpay for scrubs. I'm asking you to sign really, really, really good players. And in the case of Jadeveon Clowney, a superstar. I don't care if Clowney wants $20 million. You have the cap space. Use it. And to make matters even better, they can create more cap space. With the signing of Van Roten, they can cut Brian Winters. They'd save, I think it's $7 million by cutting Winters. Yeah, it's a little over $7 million. So they'd end up with more cap space than the Browns. I guarantee you they're cutting Winters. I don't think they should. Winters actually had a decent year last year. And offensive line continuity is really important. You know, I knew that Douglas was going to blow up the O-line and build it back up. Whatever. If he really thinks that Greg Van Roten is better than Brian Winters, I don't think he is. Or at least it's a push. But if Douglas really thinks that Van Roten is better than Winters, okay, fine. I don't hate it. I wanted Van Roten for left guard, not right guard. But you have over $40 million in cap space. You have to use it. Stop waiting for the prices to come down. They're not going to come down much more than this. And also, see, here's the thing. These agents are really smart. It doesn't take a lot of skill to go on overthecap.com and see how much cap space the Jets have. Let's say the Jets are interested in Jadeveon Clowney, which reports have said they are. Douglas is just waiting for the price to come down. Clowney's agent is going to say to the Jets, you have the money. Use it. I'm not going to take a below-market deal with you. You can afford an at-market deal or an above-market deal. You know, maybe I'm being too hard on Douglas. It seems like he has a plan. It seems like he's a smart guy. I actually have some confidence in hearing him speak. But I'm just a jaded Jets fan. I've seen this movie before. The new GM comes in and he tries to sell everyone on his plan, and then he executes it, and it falls flat. Sue me for being jaded. I'm not saying his plan isn't going to work. There's logic to being patient in free agency. God knows, I have no problem with not overpaying for scrubs. But the guys who I want the Jets to get aren't scrubs. They're players who I wanted them to bring back in December. Clowney, Anderson, Jenkins. You bring Anderson and Jenkins back and you bring Clowney in, there's nothing stopping that team from making the playoffs. Especially with Brady leaving the AFC East. There's no excuse for the Jets to not seize the mantle as best team in the AFC East. You want to tell me it's the Bills? You certainly can. But if the Jets add Jadeveon Clowney, I'd argue that makes them the favorites. See, here's the biggest thing. I don't think the Jets have done a good job seizing the opportunity that presented itself. The Bills have, the Dolphins have, the Jets haven't. For the first time in 20 years, the AFC East is up for grabs. The dynasty is dead. So I don't understand why you're not going all in. You know, he's going to try to do it through the draft. And how many times have we as Jets fans heard that? It doesn't work. For the Jets, it just doesn't. When was the last time they were really successful? Mark Sanchez's second year. You take a look at the key contributors on that team, they were all free agents. Even when they went 10-6 and missed the playoffs. They went out and signed Darrelle Revis, Antonio Cromartie, Buster Skrine, Marcus Gilchrist. When they try to do it through the draft, it doesn't work. Go look at the Jets draft picks from 2014 to 2019. It's about as bad as it can be. 2014, the Itzik 12. You have 12 draft picks. How on God's earth do you miss on 11? Your best pick was the 6th rounder. A wide receiver who may not play this year. 2015, no one from that class is still on the team. Same thing with 2016. 2017, you have the 2 safeties. 2018, fine. You traded up for Darnold. Darnold looks like he's going to be a good quarterback. Can't say that it's a guarantee, but he's on his way there. And 2019 looks like a bust already. It really, really does. Quinnen Williams had a garbage rookie year. Ja'Kai Polite is out of the NFL. And Chumi Doga had a garbage rookie year. I understand that Douglas is different from Itzik, and he's different from McCagnon. I really shouldn't compare them. But I have no idea how good of a drafter this guy's going to be. I'm not saying that his plan isn't going to work. I can't say that with any guarantee. But I'm jaded. I'm skeptical. I have to be. It's the same thing Itzik did. It's the same thing McCagnon did. And you know what? There's a reason that they're both looking for jobs now. Their vision failed. When you try to build through the draft, you have to hit on 100% of your draft picks. If you say that you're not going to be crazy aggressive in free agency, which again, I don't mind. There's logic to building through the draft. That's all well and good. But you're immediately putting yourself behind the 8 ball. You have to hit on 100% of your draft picks. Count with me the holes that the Jets have right now. Backup running back, wide receiver, 2 edge rushers, a cornerback, a kicker, and a punter. 7. You know how many draft picks the Jets have? 8. That means you can only afford to miss on 1. The way I think the draft is going to shake out, they're going to take C.J. Henderson at 11. No complaints there. I like C.J. Henderson. Does a cornerback group of Henderson, Desir, and Brian Poole scare me? No, not at all, but it could be worse. It's certainly better than it was last year. But then you head into day 2. You've got to find 2 edge rushers. That's hard. That's just tough to do. It's certainly possible. It can be done. Maybe Joe Douglas is the next John Schneider. And he can find these gems in the draft that no one's ever heard of. It's certainly possible. I've never seen him draft anyone. I have no idea if he's going to be great. I have no idea if he's going to be terrible. All I'm saying is, I'm skeptical. I'd feel a lot better about the Jets' future if they brought in Clowney and brought back Anderson and Jenkins. Then build through the draft. That's fine. The way that I would build an NFL team is, I'd look at the holes that I had entering free agency. I'd bring back the guys who I needed to bring back. I'd rather bring those guys back than look for a marginally better player in free agency. There's something to be said about continuity. There's something to be said about chemistry that you just can't put a dollar amount on. Then you look at your remaining positions of need. If there's a great free agent out there that fits one of those positions of need, bring him in. If not, then you look to the draft. I don't know who the best kicker in free agency is, but I don't mind not giving him a bunch of money if you don't think he's that good and you want to try to find one in the draft. That's fine. That's all well and good. The same thing goes for every position, except outside linebacker and wide receiver. You've got 3 really good options there. We all know how talented Jadeveon Clowney is. We all know how talented Robbie Anderson is. And Jordan Jenkins had a really good year last year. 66.9 overall grade, according to Pro Football Focus. He's always been a really good player. Not great, really good. But he's young, he's 25 years old. I'm not asking you to break the bank for him, but it wouldn't hurt to sign him to a 3-year deal. Lord knows you have the money. Maybe I'm being too hard on Douglas. Maybe this guy is truly the next great drafter in the NFL. But I have to be jaded as a Jets fan. I can't have blind faith for a team with the 3rd longest active playoff drought in the NFL, soon to be the longest. I think the Browns are making the playoffs, and I definitely think the Buccaneers are making the playoffs. As it stands right now, I don't think the Jets are making the playoffs. That can change if they bring in Clowney and bring back Anderson and Jenkins, and you have a good draft, you fill the holes you need to fill. But as of right now, I don't think this team is a playoff team. Alright, moving on now to a huge deal that happened on Friday as I was either editing or recording Friday's show and I just didn't want to revise it. I had to set a deadline, and this just broke after the deadline. Andres Pete being locked up by the Saints. 5 years, $57.5 million. What has Andres Pete done recently to deserve that contract? Look, Pete came into the league, and in his first few years, he looked like he was going to be a really good player in this league for a long time. 13th overall pick at Stanford. Ton of talent. I liked him in 2015. But then in 2018, he falls off a cliff. And last year, he got hurt. He missed 6 games. And to make matters worse, when he was healthy, he really wasn't that good. What has Andres Pete done recently to deserve that contract? You want to bring him back because he's young and he's one of your own and you saw him be successful for you before? I don't mind that. That's called a prove-it deal. But you just gave him his big boy contract when he's done nothing recently to earn it. You've got an old Drew Brees behind center, and you're going to have Taysom Hill behind center sooner rather than later. You need a great offensive line. Andres Pete is not a great offensive lineman. This signing is not going to work out. No chance. Moving on now to the Steelers bringing in Eric Ebron for 2 years at $12 million. And this one makes a ton of sense. Vance McDonald was expected to have a really good year last year, and he didn't. Nick Vannett signed elsewhere. I'll get into that in a minute. So the Steelers had to find another tight end, and they found a really good one in Eric Ebron. Ebron's good. He's not great. You want to call him a bust? You certainly can. 10th overall pick in 2014 by the Lions, and he's only made 1 Pro Bowl. This guy was expected to be the next Tony Gonzalez, and he's been a far cry from it. I remember when he was a free agent for the first time. A bunch of Jets fans were screaming for him. He was better than any option the Jets had. I mean, granted, it has worked out. I like Ryan Griffin. I like Chris Herndon, and I like Trayvon Wesco. Daniel Brown's a good blocker. Ebron has always been good, not great. I don't mind the Steelers bringing him in. They have to pull out all the stops to put a good team around Ben Roethlisberger. He doesn't have too many years left. And the Steelers really need to start thinking about what they're going to do at quarterback in the future. Mason Rudolph isn't the answer. Duck Hodges isn't the answer. They are going to look to draft a quarterback of the future this year. No question about it. Moving on now to the Broncos bringing in Melvin Gordon for 2 years at $16 million. And I really like this move for the Broncos. Remember when Royce Freeman was a fantasy darling? He was going to have a great year. He was going to be the next Terrell Davis. How'd that work out? Oh man, Freeman is a huge bust. Running backs are not replaceable. You want to tell me you don't want to spend a lot of money at that position because you can find similar production elsewhere? I understand your point, and there's certainly evidence to support it. But, look, the simple fact is, You saw it with Royce Freeman. It didn't work. And there are a bunch of guys who I can point to that were given the opportunity to pound the rock a bunch of times, and they weren't able to do anything with it. Philip Lindsay comes in, local kid, undrafted free agent, no one had ever heard of him, immediately looks better than Freeman. 1,000-yard back-to-back years as an undrafted free agent. He is so special. Now to bring in a guy like Melvin Gordon to play alongside Lindsay, that makes the Broncos' backfield scary. Melvin Gordon's a really good player. He's not great. I definitely wouldn't use that word to describe him, but he's really, really good. The Broncos are pulling out all the stops this year to try to make the playoffs. I commend them for it. It seems like they have their guy in Drew Lock. I really, really like Lock. Always did out of Missouri. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Broncos made the playoffs next year. Moving on now to the Saints making a huge move, bringing in Emmanuel Sanders to play alongside Michael Thomas. That's a really good 1-2 punch for Drew Brees. Look, the Saints did a bad job with his O-line in locking up Pete to that monster contract, but they did a good job surrounding him with weapons. Emmanuel Sanders can still play. You saw him with the Niners. He may have been their best wide receiver. And to pair him with Michael Thomas is scary. It's going to be really fun watching the Saints and Buccaneers go at it twice this year. 2 future Hall of Famers dueling at quarterback. Evans and Godwin versus Thomas and Sanders. Ooh, man. The NFC South may have just become the most fun division in all of football. Moving on now to the Broncos signing Nick Vannett for 2 years at $5.7 million. Vannett's not a terrible player. He's certainly not great. He's a good backup tight end. No issue there. And the fact that the Broncos are pairing him with Noah Fant, who is probably one of the best young tight ends in football already, was the Broncos' second best pass catcher last year, just makes that tight end group that much scarier. The Broncos have tried for a long time to find that next Shannon Sharp. Jeff Heuerman has never been that great. Troy Fumagalli hasn't worked out. Jake Butt hasn't worked out. And now you bring in a proven backup in Vannett. It just makes their skill position group that much better. Lindsay, Gordon, Sutton, Fant, and Vannett. It's certainly not great. There's no superstar there. Lindsay and Sutton are very, very, very good. Gordon is very, very good. But I'll tell you, that's a really good group for Drew Lock. I'm telling you, no excuse for the Broncos to not make the playoffs next year. There was an interesting trade that happened on Friday, an intra-division one. Chris Wormley going to the Steelers along with a 7th rounder next year for a 5th rounder next year. I gotta tell you, the Steelers easily won that trade. Wormley is not a household name, and no one's gonna mistake him for Ray Lewis anytime soon, but he's a really good rotational lineman. And we all know the track record of the Ravens and their defense. there's still, for lack of a better word, a mystique there. You're a Ravens defender? Great, I want you. And Lord knows the Steelers needed a defensive tackle. As it stands right now, the only defensive tackles on their roster are Wormley and some guy named Daniel McCullers. Admittedly, I've never heard of him. Great trade for the Steelers. They easily win it. I understand why the Ravens did it. They have a glut of defensive linemen, so you help clear up the logjam a little bit. But I don't like the fact that they traded him within the division, and they certainly didn't get anywhere close to what they should have gotten for him. I'd have given up a 4th rounder for him. I think that's a fair haul for him. Alright, here's my long-awaited interview with Paul Logothetis. You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I'm fortunate enough to be joined by Paul Logothetis, the author of Toe Blake, Winning is Everything. Paul, bonjour, monsieur. How are you?
Bonjour, Jacob. How are you doing? Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
No, my pleasure, and I really appreciate you letting me reschedule this interview. The technical issue was entirely my fault, and you are a gentleman and a scholar for letting me reschedule it.
Oh, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
All right. So, how did Blake get the nickname Toe?
So Toe got the nickname either from a younger sibling, I couldn't narrow down exactly which one it was. There's a lot of conflicting reports from our research. He had said in one interview that he got it from his little sister, and then another one he said he got it from his little brother. So it's not clear, but either way, neither of them could say Hector, so they said Hecto instead, and that's the nickname that stuck. Another kind of tidbit I found about his nickname, which I don't think was quite accurate, but was kind of interesting, was that they said that he played with the puck close to his feet. He carried it close to his toes, so it could have came from there as well. But so a few different places, but it definitely came from one of the siblings growing up.
All right, that's why I'm glad that I'm an only child.
There you go.
So, what can you tell us about the punchline?
So yeah, the punchline, I mean, that's one of hockey's greatest lines. No doubt about it. I mean, Toe was a little bit of the glue that brought it all together, because, he wasn't the flashy scorer of Maurice Rocket Richard, and he wasn't the playmaker of Elmer Locke at center, but he really was the grinder, the one who did all the dirty work, who got who set up a lot of the play for the two of them, and definitely provided the physical presence on the line too, to sort of protect his teammates as well. Even though Elmer Locke has a long history of a lot of broken bones, but Toe really they really helped Toe, and Toe really helped them in a sense. I mean, Toe really blossomed when he was put on to that line. He was already an all-star. He was already one of the league's best players when Dick Irvin introduced him to that line. And it just I think it stretched his career longer as well. He was right there with Elmer and the Rocket in scoring in the NHL. They were 1, 2, 3 a few seasons, and it really did. I think it lengthened his career, and he had quite a long career when you look back for that time, about a 13-year career. So in the 30s and 40s, that was pretty impressive. No question about that. And I'll tell you what, I'm sure you'll agree with me when I say this: the punchline is without question one of the most underrated lines in NHL history. They were incredibly dominant. Would you agree with that? Oh, definitely. I think it's the effect of it being 80 years ago or whatever it is. That's the sort of the problem. It gets kind of lost in the fog of time and our collective memory. But no doubt about it. It definitely is one of the most impactful lines, and was for a long time the best line in hockey, I think. So can you lay out Blake's 1938-39 season? Yeah, so I mean, he's coming off 1938. He joined the Canadiens in 1936 from the Maroons. So he had just gotten a sort of full 2 seasons under his belt with the Habs. progressing very well, trending in the right direction. In 38, he's selected to the NHL's second All-Star team with a 33-point season. So right away, he's making a mark. And 39 was really the year where the NHL and hockey was really saw Blake the player and how valuable he was. He won the Hart Trophy after leading the NHL in scoring that season. He had 47 points, 24 goals. He's Canadian Athlete of the Year, first team All-Star. And that's playing on a team that was also second from last in the league. So it wasn't like he had a lot of help to get those points, and he did it. And doing that really, after that, when Dick Irvin came in a few seasons later, the Canadians were really in full rebuild at that point, and Toe was really the untouchable at that point. They weren't willing to. They were going to build the team around him. And they even put the whole team on waivers except for him and two other players at one point, and said, this is going to be our guy. And that was the case. And with Toe, they had someone who was, he was unflinchingly for the cause of the Canadians. He loved the Canadians growing up. He was so happy to join them from the Maroons. So for him, it was, this is a dream come true, a storybook for him to be with the Canadians and to be named captain eventually soon as a result of this encouraging play that he was showing and his improvement and improvement in his temper as well.
Talking to Paul Logothetis, the author of Toe Blake, Winning is Everything. So would you be able to describe Blake's 1943-44 season?
So, that's the season when the punchline is born in an 8-3 win over the Red Wings just around Christmas time. And it starts, funnily enough, by Dick Irvin's away on holiday at Christmas time, and he hadn't gone back in time for the game. He'd gone back to Saskatchewan. So Toe had been leading the practices while Dick was away, and he decided to put the punchline together in practice. And then eventually in the game, the punchline stayed for that game. They performed exceedingly well. Dick got back, but he didn't stick with it right away. But then eventually came back to it, I think, a few games later in January, if I remember right. And after that, it was just sort of off to the races with that line. That season, the Canadians go all the way, and they win their first cup since 31. So that was a long stretch for the Canadians, although it's double now here in this time, in this day and age, which is, let's not get into that. But yeah, those were great playoffs for them, because the season before too, they had a really disappointing playoff exit too. They really had been one of the contenders for the Stanley Cup, and they went out in the first round. So that was a disappointment. So to come back and to win the cup was definitely something that was expected, I think, in the locker room and the punchline. Toe set the NHL record that season for playoffs, 18 points in 9 games, and also scored a record 5 assists in one playoff game, which, Rocket had 5 goals in that game, which was a record then too. So, and he scored the Stanley Cup winning clinching goal against Chicago. So they swept the Blackhawks, and he scored the first of his 2 Stanley Cup clinching goals, which, is not done by too many. And even today, no one's done it 3 times. So he's in exclusive company there with that record as well.
All right, so we'll fast forward a couple seasons. What can you tell us about the 45-46 season for Blake?
Yeah, another surprising season in the sense that, not that surprising in the success, but that he won the Lady Byng that year, which is, for the most gentlemanly player, for a player that was renowned for having a bad temper, for getting physical when necessary. One part of my book, from the research, from talking to some people back in Sudbury where he played minor league hockey, him and another teammate had lined up a player for, to physically pummel them, and ended up breaking his leg. So this was a guy that definitely didn't want to cross. Everyone talked about his fingers being, these huge hands he had. He wasn't a huge guy, but he was physically stout and intimidating. He had a strong, gruff way about him, and on the ice, he was a competitor. He was a competitor off the ice. He was a coach too, so he never gave way. So to see that, to have him have only 2 penalty minutes in that season was like a head turner, and even he complained about those 2 minutes. They weren't deserved. He loved to fight with he loved to give it to the refs as well.
No one ever agrees with him, though.
Yeah, exactly. So he's never wrong. He was never wrong anyway in his mind. So. So he won the Lady Byng, and the Canadians won the Stanley Cup too. His second with the Canadians, and his last before he retired. And he scored another Stanley Cup clinching goal when they beat Boston 4-1 in a best-of-7 series there for the Stanley Cup. So he was also named a second-team All-Star. So this, despite him being at this point, he's about 35 years old, and there's talk already about him winding down and getting out of hockey. But I mean, he was still giving it for the Canadians on the ice. I mean, no doubt about that. Even though he only had another season and a half left in him in the end before injury led to his retirement. But it was really a surprise in that sense, this strong season. But it also showed, his ability and his skill level and his desire too, because he was always someone who valued hard work and loved playing hockey. So for him, he wanted to stretch out his playing career as long as he possibly could. That was really important to him.
All right. Now, you touched on the hit that ended his career. I'd like you to go a little more in depth on it if you can. Can you lay out that hit?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was at the Forum, and that was a game against the New York Rangers. Bill Giuseppe, the defenseman, lined him up in a corner. It was the same end of the rink as what Howie Morenz got hit in as well. The other side, the other corner boards, and a similar sort of play. So when it happened, people were kind of left aghast at it because it was very similar and worrisome in that sense. But he got lined up, caught his skate in the boards awkwardly, and sort of twisted his leg. He ended up with a double fracture of his leg, and there was a sort of hush over the ice, and I think there was a lot of criticism after that. The Canadians fans didn't give him a standing ovation or anything as he was taken off the ice, but I think part of that is that a lot of people expected him to come back. Just he was this Iron Man, and didn't think it was always that serious. I mean, he played with broken wrist before. He played with leg problems, back problems, even in '46 during that Stanley Cup run. He had to sit out some periods because he was so banged up. But so anyway, he gets carried off by the medical staff, and they don't do a very dignified job of that either. They end up dropping him one time as they're carrying him off, so that wasn't great. But then after that, I mean, it was really the writing was on the wall at that point. Like even I write about it in the book about the dressing room mood afterwards was really somber, and a lot of limping around, a lot of faces down on the ground. It felt like a bit like a funeral, a wake almost. People just sort of slowly gathering their things and knowing, this is probably the end of an era. And surprisingly enough, funny enough, Diggerman was just sort of like, all right, let's go, guys. Like he was sober for a minute, and then he moved on, and they had a bus to catch to the train to get to Chicago, I think. So they didn't have really much time to mourn in that sense. But it was an odd evening and an odd way to go out for someone who had given so much for the organization and
Talking to Paul Logothetis, the author of Toe Blake, Winning is Everything. So he couldn't stay away from the game after getting that injury. How did he become the head coach of the Canadians?
Yeah, so I mean, the Canadians had always had this idea of Blake would stay with the organization. A season before he got injured and was forced to retire, they had made him a super scout, and he'd been offered a chance to coach in Buffalo, which is one of the Canadians' minor league affiliates. But he really wanted to chase the NHL points record, which he was getting close to. He ended up being about 21 points shy of matching Bill Cowley's record when he went out. But so once he was injured, the Canadians, fast-tracked that plan. They sent him to Houston to coach their team down there, and they ended up winning the USHL title that season. And after that, he took the Buffalo job and came back. But things didn't go great in Buffalo. Art Chapman, the owner, was definitely, and him definitely did not get along. They didn't have the same vision of hockey. He was really an Eddie Shore kind of guy, Art Chapman, and Blake wasn't. And even though they were both kind of old-time hockey guys, but so that lasted until January, and then they parted ways in January of '49, and then this small club from the Quebec Senior League, Valleyfield Braves, jumped on the chance and hired Blake, and the Canadiens didn't have anything for him at that time, and Valleyfield was part of this league the Canadiens had set up anyway, so they were happy to see him stay close by and monitor him and see how he did. Blake sort of took it differently. He was kind of pissed off that, the Canadiens weren't pushing for him to come into the fold and maybe have some kind of role. But at the same time, I mean, back then there weren't assistant coaches. He didn't have this sort of staff where a guy could come in and get his feet wet. So he went to Valleyfield and ended up spending four seasons there, 4 and a bit, and won a title there as well in his second season there. And also opened a tavern in downtown Montreal. So he was a busy guy, and eventually he left Valleyfield in '54 and was out of hockey for about a year. And then it was time. Then the Richard riots happened in Montreal. A lot of turmoil, a lot of problems there, and the Canadiens decided it was time to let Dick Irvin go. They didn't feel he handled the situation very well. He didn't have a good handle on the Rocket, and Toe was suddenly the front runner for that position, and there was a lot of talk about who it might be, but in the end he emerged and he took over in '55, and then the rest is history in a sense.
The Richard riots are one of my favorite moments in hockey history. Obviously, sad moment, no excuse to riot, but it's just amazing how it happened. Commissioner Campbell suspends Rocket Richard, then he goes to the next game. How on God's earth do you go to the next game at the Montreal Forum after suspending Rocket Richard? Why didn't someone get in his ear and say, yeah, Commissioner, that's not a good idea. Don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, this was definitely ego with Campbell. I mean, because this was something that struck at the very heart in the soul of the city to see the Rocket get suspended like that. So for him to go was really it was a power play by Campbell, no doubt about it. For the Montreal Canadiens fans, it was another Anglo power play in that sense. It was sort of the Frenchman, thumbing in the face of the Frenchman, and he was pummeled not only with fists but with like rotten fruit and eggs, and then that led to the tear gas going off in the Forum and rioting in the streets. So
Rocket Richard had to go on the radio in Montreal to stop the riots. He was the only guy who they would listen to. It's unreal.
Yeah, it's something, all right. I mean, at the time too, it was the biggest, I believe it was like the biggest mass riot or disturbance in North America in terms of a sporting event or anything coming out of a sporting event. Now everyone riots after they win the title or whatever. Back then it wasn't so common, right?
Right. I mean, even if you're Vancouver, you riot when you lose. So
yeah, there you go.
All right. So why didn't Blake want Jacques Plante to wear a mask?
Well, I think that was a testament to his sort of old school mentality. He also didn't think that you could see the puck as well with the mask on. So it was a sort of this idea that it was going to limit or handicap Plante and his ability, and anything that limited or handicapped Plante to Blake was a no-no, because Blake, he thought Plante was the best goalie he'd ever seen in his career, but he also could not stand the guy in the sense that he was a hypochondriac. He was always making excuses. A lot of times Blake felt like he couldn't count on him. He didn't know if he was going to, something was aching. Can I count on this guy tonight or not? And back then there wasn't really a backup goalie. There was in an emergency, but I mean, they played through, he'd go in, get stitched up and come back out. So Blake wasn't crazy about it. But in the end, it happened. And Blake, even later on, took some credit for it, saying that, he was the one who told Plante to put on a mask in practice, brought in an old umpire's mask from the baseball diamond and gave it to him to wear, and then things generated from there. But, he was never enamored with it. But in the end, he sort of accepted it, and and learn to live with it because they'd keep winning. But I think if he had a choice, he would have ripped it off his face.
All right. So since he died recently, I have to ask you this. Would you be able to describe the relationship between Blake and the Pocket Rocket, Henri Richard?
Yeah, I mean, Henri was their relationship was akin to a sort of a father-son relationship, not that in the tightness, but more in the respect and the mutual respect I think they felt for each other. I think Toe was really impressed by how the Pocket was able to come in and make his own mark, be his own man on his own merit, under the glare and the shadow of his bigger brother, the Rocket. And I think he was also surprised by his tenacity and ability, because when the Pocket came in, I mean, he came in as a rookie in Blake's first rookie season too as a coach. And I think that season, Blake was definitely not counting on him to make the team. He wanted someone sturdy and that he could count on to play center or to fill in wherever he did, which is what Pocket did a little bit in that first season. And an ex-player named André Corriveau was someone who he had coached at Valleyfield, was in the running, was between Pocket and him for sort of the last spot on the team. And, in my research, looking back, I would have thought he would have went with Corriveau just because he had that stability there. He knew what he was getting, but, he took a chance on the Pocket and it really worked out. And I think that bore the nature of their relationship and Toe stuck with him. And I mean, the Pocket was an incredible player for Toe and a big part of his success as well, winning 11 cups as a player. So very, very strong relationship. But I mean, Blake didn't mix too much with his players. He loved being with the players, but none of them were really that tight with him, except for maybe Belleville, that where there was a sort of off-ice relationship that was beyond a mutual respect. I mean, they were a little bit closer, those two, and other ones that he worked with, like the Rocket too, as well.
Now, you're in Montreal. I got to ask you this. What was the mood like in the city when he died?
Yeah, it was definitely, I mean, I think it wasn't a big shock. We all knew he was in bad shape. I tried to reach out to him to interview him for this book too, but he was in the grips of Alzheimer's then, so it wasn't a huge shock. It was sad, that's for sure. I think it's another piece of the great success of the Canadiens, of those 50s, 60s, 70s teams that now is gone again, and just reminds us of the great legacy in the past that we once had. That is like a very in the distant rearview mirror, and it's sad in that sense too. It also gave us a chance to sort of remember, this other Richard, which was nice, because he does get lost in the glare of the Rocket, even though he's won 11 Stanley Cups as a player, which is an incredible achievement.
Yeah, no question about that. He was a hell of a hockey player in the Hockey Hall of Fame for a reason. Talking to Paul Logothetis, the author of Toe Blake, Winning is Everything. And Paul, I'll get you out on this. I have Blake third on my list of best NHL coaches ever. I had him fourth when we first spoke, but then I thought about it. I put him up to third. Where does Blake rank on your list of the best NHL coaches ever?
I'm glad I swayed you a little bit. I'm happy to hear that.
I put him ahead of Dick Irvin. I can't put him ahead of Al Arbor, though. Sorry, there's a little bit of bias there.
No doubt. You know what? I don't blame you. I'm going to do a little bias, too. I mean, to me, he's I have obviously a personal connection with the book and that. So to me, he's the best. Also, what he symbolizes about the Canadiens and hockey, and so I have him. Him and I think it's sort of debatable between him and Scotty Bowman. You can kind of swap them one or two. For different reasons, but I like the fact that Blake, he won so much in so little time, and plus his success as a player. I know it shouldn't affect the coaching, but I think the whole package sort of gives me the extra push for him, and with Bowman right there as well, and Oliver and Dick Irvin definitely up there in the top five.
Oh, no question about that. All right, Paul. Au revoir, mon frère. Thank you for your time.
Merci beaucoup, Jacob. Nice to talk to you again.
All right. That was Paul Logothetis. His book is Toe Blake, Winning is Everything. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro.
Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. Tomorrow, hopefully some NFL news, probably the trifecta, and after all that, you're going to get an exclusive interview that I did with Yaron Weitzman. He wrote a book on Sam Hinkie and the process. It was a little feisty. It was certainly good. I had a lot of fun talking to him. And I really hope that you enjoy it. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying that I had a lot of no-hitters in the minors. There were games when I didn't hit anyone at all.